Rest of us can get going. Are there any questions about the update agenda? Rob, did you have an update?
We do actually, you may not have seen Kevin's, forget sent out, I know we received interest from Senator Bennett's office about some legislation that they are reintroducing the Supporting Mental Assistance Responder Teams Community Policing Act, the SMART Community Policing Act, basically would provide some funding for some of the co-responder type programs that we've been running, so seemed aligned with your priorities, wanted to see if you were generally in concurrence with producing a letter, which I think Kevin included a draft on. If you're prepared, we can make that happen.
Thoughts on this one?
I mean, I have lots of questions. If anybody's willing to respond away with that, then. Like, as far as like the bill itself, some of the language in there is pretty vague and kind of open. And I'd be curious around like what percentage of calls Thornton has that would be eligible for that program. What kind of outcomes are actually measurable and could be actually fed back to us. And then liability issues that I see this there as well. Somebody calls 911 and we send out a psychiatric person, they get shot. There were people were like, well, I called 911. It was the police department. I was expecting to show up. So there's lots of different questions I have around that. So I personally would not be in support of this until some of those things got answered.
It's David for his opinion.
So I got Justin, then Dave, and then Chris. Justin?
Okay, my question is about our current co-respondent program and how this aligns with, it sounds very similar to what we do, but maybe different. How does it align with what we currently do with co-responders?
Our understanding, this is a potential funding source for the program that we're running. The extent it's different or there are different restrictions, I cannot speak to that. So I would be happy to get additional information.
Yeah.
Right back for you.
I know we already do have a pretty well-established co-responder program that has been vetted and is actually quite successful. The way I read this was, hey, this is a way to get federal funding for our program that is already successful and in place. So in that regard, I'm very supportive of that because it would alleviate some of the costs that we have through our own funding mechanisms and get some federal funding for that. So if that's the case, then yes, I would be in support of this legislation because it would certainly help out the program that we have and help us pay for it. So yeah, for instance.
Dave?
I would want to have some of the vagueness answered. Like I don't know what they mean by a certain low level crimes. What does that even mean? From my experience, just because it's a low level crime doesn't mean it's not a dangerous call. I mean, we can cite traffic stops up and down, which are routine and low level. So I'm very hesitant to just randomly send a clinician to a low level crime without a police officer there in the event something goes wrong. So now, because the idea of the co-responder was trying to split the duties of law enforcement so they're not doing clinician work and enforcing the law. And now basically we're just reversing that and putting the clinician on responsible for not only solving the mental health crisis, but any potential safety that occurs. I mean, just because you're in a mental crisis doesn't mean you're not dangerous. I mean, that doesn't mean that weapons don't hurt you just as much as somebody that's not in a mental health crisis. So I'm very curious to what that means. I'm all about the funding and I love the co-responder program, but I'm also not about sacrificing safety in that name. So I'm definitely not in support without the questions answered.
Chris?
So I guess two questions. First would be for David because you're in the police department. Is that ever been a case or a situation where they would send a clinician unaccompanied? Is that never? Okay.
They do they'll handle it by phone, but if a co-responder is responding out to a house, there will be an officer dispatched with them.
Okay. So then my follow-up to that is that how this funding is being described? Is that it would create a situation that David says is highly dangerous and not typical? Or would we even go down that path of considering that presenting a clinician without a police officer?
I don't think we know the answer to that, so we'll have to follow up.
I can tell you the answer to the second one is that no, we would not.
Okay.
Councilmember Akunto is 100% right. And just because something is a low level non-threat situation, when you're talking about mental health issues, that can change on a dime. So co-responder is intended to be co-responding with the law enforcement officer with the clinician.
So I guess
I
that,
wouldn't deviate from
okay, and I think that makes complete sense. I agree with both of you. So my position would be is I would support it as long as we can identify if that's not some sort of requirement or stipulation, is that that's the path we're gonna go. If it doesn't change our typical processes, then of course, yes, let's get some funding so that we can continue to support that with some government dollars.
Yeah, that was my comment as well, it's because the way the language reads, it says that it frees up the police officers to do more violent crime and stuff. It's like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I think it does deserve clarification. You know, so if we hold off the letter and we can get that answer over the next 3 to 5 days, then.
We
I'm
can
all
even
for
have the letter modified to include that. We think it's really important that the co-responder program is supported
Yes.
and that through this, maybe if it aligns, that it would help us with funding of those programs.
Yeah, pending their answer, maybe that's not what their intent is to remove police officers, so then we'd be redundant in our statement, but. That's all I have said. I do support it, but I think they brought up some very,
Clarification.
yeah, they brought up a really good point, and I don't want that to be a requirement to receive the funding.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Yeah, so, yeah, I'm in agreement with my colleagues as well, you know. Sorry, in principle, I'm for the letter, but with that being said, Councilman David, it brings up a valid point, being he's in law enforcement, he knows what's going on in real time, and Devin and they bring up those points, and then, Chris, backing it up as well. And we have a great co-responder program as this. I do believe, Chief Bear, if I'm not correct, with our co-responder program, we do have a Thornton police officer with the co-responder, correct, and with Donut.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's something that we need to maintain. We cannot say, okay, just let the co-responder be on their own, because like David said, you just never know if something, it could go just like that if you're in a mental health crisis. So in principle, I am for the letter, however, I do think we need more clarification, and then I can fully support it. That's all I have.
Anything to add, Cherish? So I think we have general support with the clarification to make sure that, to Chris's point, we don't lose funding if we don't follow that exact approach.
Thank you. That's it.
Good evening. I'm changing your agenda again tonight. We're canceling the executive session on the Quebec Street overpass. The parties continue to negotiate. I know that E470 has canceled this item going to their roadway committee too. So I think the timing on when we would bring this to council would be later than June 16th, which we had initially told you. As soon as we have any substantive information to convey back to you, we'll reschedule this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, formal agenda. Any questions about that one? All right, just some housekeeping. Who would like to read the land acknowledgement tonight?
I can read it.
All right, we have 2 presentations. We have a recognition of a retirement. Is it Brazil?
Brazil.
I was right the first time.
Wrong names.
It's the last day.
All right, and then 7B is the LGBTQIA+ Pride Month, and John got that one.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, then we have a legislative public hearing, 11A1 and 11A2. This is related to the Prop 123 fast track projects. Chris, you got it?
Which one were you saying?
11A1 and A2. And then we have an action item to amend the electric assisted bike.
I'll do that one.
All right. All right, let's jump into briefings. We got the quarterly transportation update.
Thanks for taking the table. This is your regular quarterly update on all things transportation. We do have some news on I-25, which I think you already know already, but we'll Can't get into it.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem and Council, and Mayor Pro Tem is not here tonight. And I am Kent Mormon. I'm the Regional Transportation Engineer for the City of Thornton. There are several things that we're not talking about tonight, but I want to let you know that there's more detail in your packets on all the quarterly updates. Now highlight just a few of them. And again, the purpose tonight is just to provide some of those updates. Let's start with RTD. They're have some general updates there. They've started their comprehensive operational analysis, which with that, they're going to look at how their buses and their rail run. And they've indicated to us that they're looking at maybe some east-west, north-south routes as opposed to the spoke and wheel like they've been running. They're starting to realize that people aren't traveling all the way downtown, and so they're looking at some options there. Just for your information, you can walk from 104th and Federal to 104th and Colorado faster than you can ride a bus right now. So hopefully they address some of that.
Please say that many, many times in all of the meetings that you're in.
I remind them each and every time. But they're anticipating input from stakeholders, which includes us later this year. I don't have a time frame yet, but I would assume it's going to be somewhere around August timeframe. The other thing is that the CEO general manager has informed the board of not wanting to renew her contract, so it expires in May of 2027. And the board's starting to the replacement process now and hiring a firm to go out. The other thing that for RTD is that there's been two proposals come forward to complete the line up to 162nd Avenue. And the advantage that I see is at least they're talking about completing it, which is a long time coming for a project that was supposed to be done in 2015. The first one was proposed at NADA by RT Director Whitmore, and he was asking NADA to write a letter. He has since asked that we hold off just a little, but it's both of these proposals start the process looking at realistic construction and operation costs for the end line. And it's really to start that process. That's what happened and how they got the extension to Lone Tree and how they are extending the line up to Longmont. The director's proposal includes clean transit enterprise funds to fund the study. And that would lead to next steps, which hopefully reach construction operation. The alternate proposal, which is coming up through Adams County, and in fact, they're meeting tomorrow night with the RTD board on this, proposes that there be a consortium and that it be managed by Adams County, and that they use the RTD Fast Track's internal savings account, which was actually proposed by a previous Thornton mayor. And they finally caved and started that account, taking all the savings that they were having from the other tracks to fund that. If you'll recall, they're using that FISA account to fund a lot of the B line up to Longmont, but there's still about $10 million left in that account. And so the proposal is to possibly use some of that. Their proposal goes further, though. They want to go ahead and get bus rapid transit started on 120th Avenue and possibly Colorado 7. And they see that this study might lead to a possible sales tax ask, is what we understand. I think the next step is for RTD to look at the proposals, and then once they've looked at it, for Thornton to obtain some additional information. Talk a little about CDOT now. We have a new transportation commissioner. His name is Carl Castillo, and he's for District 4, serves Adams County, Boulder County, and parts of the city and county of Broomfield. He was confirmed by the Senate May 1st. And the other good thing is that the Colorado Transportation Commission approved last Thursday on my birthday, the 10-year plan that includes I-25 from US 36 up to Colorado 66 on there. And I'll talk a little more in depth about that here in a few minutes. And as we go into those funding options, the Colorado Transportation Investment Office, or CTIO, has figured out a way to fund US 36 to 104th. Also, the rest of it from 120th or 104th to 120th, and then E470 up to Colorado 66. In talking and speaking with the Region 1 staff, which covers Thornton, and the Region 4, which is Highway 7's the dividing line between Region 1 and Region 4 staff. They're talking about, with this funding going through, they're starting to finish up plans in US 36 to 104th. They're hoping to break ground with construction late next year. I couldn't get it earlier than that, but so hopefully by November, December, we see something moving out there. And then E470 to Colorado 66, we have 30% plans for the interchange already done. We have a record of decision by the Federal Highway Administration from E470 up through the north side of Colorado 7 interchange. And then they still need to do some environmental work from Highway 7 up to Colorado 66. But all of that being said, they're looking at using a construction management general contractor. So they'll be designing parts of it while they're building parts of it. And that's the way.
Could never go wrong with that.
Yeah, that's what they've done from Colorado 66 north on I-25. And they're still having discussions as to who will manage from E470 up to Colorado 66. The advantage I see is that it's moving forward, and hopefully, again, they're hopefully going to have some construction in 2027. Now, whether that starts north and comes south, or starts south and comes north, or starts in the middle and goes both ways, they haven't said. So good news there as far as things moving forward. Now, as we start talking about I-25, I want to concentrate more on the US 36 to 104 section. They've completed value engineering. A lot of you saw the plans that they presented to the public earlier on this year. I think it was this year, may have been late last year. Anyway, they looked at it, and what value engineering does is it looks, is there a cheaper way to build it and still get an improved product or a project out of it? But it's really about reducing cost and while maintaining and enhancing performance. What's being reviewed, what was reviewed was 88th Avenue bridge width, the west side of Thornton Park and Ride, the open channel, an open channel from Niagara Creek. It's currently goes under I-25. It's all boxed in and not open. And then a relocation of Niagara Creek possibly to the west side of I-25. So those are the things that they're looking at. So I'd like to start with the 88th Avenue Bridge, which does affect 88th Avenue. And they actually will then build, and I found it was, with these value engineering, they saved $10 million. That's on top of the $90 million they built by not having the Thornton Park and Rides in the middle of I-25. So that's $100 million that they're saved so far on these projects. They would build 88th Avenue from Conifer over to Grant, and it would be to the 88th Avenue corridor study that we completed last year that council was informed about, that we completed. And so they would be building that section of road for us, which saves us money. The second one is the bridge width. And this is engineering, but what you're looking at here is the width of the bridge. And on the outside on both sides, we've insisted that they have protected bicycle lanes and pedestrian movements. And then on the inside, they originally proposed four lanes. Now it's 2 lanes. It reduces the width of the bridge from 86 feet to 68 feet. So that's 18 feet less bridge in width, 250 foot long. And that's a significant savings. And that's where they're getting a lot of their savings on this project. And again, it conforms with our 88th Avenue corridor study. So we're all for it from a staff standpoint. The next one, and this takes a little more explanation. This is the other value engineering. if you look at the green hatched area up in the north, they're proposing to take part of the parking lot of RTD and convert it to a park or green space. We asked, so who's gonna maintain that? That's because this area is, that parking lot is actually leased by RTD from CDOT, who owns the property. So those are some discussions that we've asked and they haven't answered. They're gonna enhance the detention pond in there, and on there. And again, that would be RTD or CDOT to maintain, from what I understand. They would still keep part of the parking lot there, and that's the area right below the green area. And then they would cross underneath, and the boarding will be on the east side of, for all the buses will be on the east side, out of the east parking lot of the Thornton Park and Ride at this time. And then the other thing that you'll see there, there's a blue line coming across. It's real faint. It comes between the green and 88th Avenue, is the street running north-south on the right side there. It'll come under 88th Avenue from the Niver Creek detention pond that we have, or lake, whatever you want to call it. And then it will be open channel, and it will go down along I-25. Instead of crossing under right there, they'll leave a little water just to keep the wetlands working on the west side, but they'll essentially divert the main channel to the west side and take it down to what's called the Trib L, and then go under I-25 at that existing bridge that they're gonna have to, and culvert that they're gonna have to fix anyway. One of the results of that is they'll also get to relocate one of our sanitary sewer lines. And so that they have to also provide us access so that we can service that line. So anyway, that's what they're looking at. They're still looking at a crossing underneath the I-25, the trail going under I-25 for the Niver Creek Trail, and then coming out on the other side. So that's what they're looking at from a value engineering standpoint. Next is betterments. And a betterment is making something better. It's advancing or increasing the value, advancing some design. It probably enhances conditions near the project, and it's probably upgrading property. And the difference between value engineering, which tries to reduce cost, and a betterment, it often wants to improve aesthetics, function, and other improvements in the general area. Normally, CDOT funds the value engineering, and often, like 98% of the time plus, asks locals to fund the betterments. And so you need to understand that as we talk about betterments, they may be coming, with their hands out, asking for money from us. Now, our standpoint is, as I mentioned, we've saved them $100 million so far, so maybe they should fund these betterments, but we don't know how those negotiations at some point. We'll be back to council, I'm sure, on that. So the betterments that staff has been speaking with them about is an enhanced bridge at 88th Avenue from an aesthetic standpoint, enhanced bridge lighting on the corners to match bridges that, like at 84th Avenue, and I'll show you a picture of that. An improved barrier fence that was requested along I-25 that maybe keep people from wandering onto the I-25 property, and then some improved landscaping. So the top bridge, the top picture is the existing 88th Avenue bridge. And yes, it needs painted, but that's what you'll get from CDOT. That's their standard bridge. So you just need to be aware that's what we'll see out there. The bottom bridge is 84th Avenue, where the city came in and made some improvements. And we improved the lighting. You see the bollards on each corner. We've also copied that. I call them the big balls. They're lit. We've done that at 136 and 144th. We've also done the colors like that at all the bridges, including the new pedestrian bridge going in at the interim mobility hub at 7. You'll see that we've done landscaping. We've done some other things. Instead of a concrete wall, we've either faced it or put in stone, made it look a lot nicer, I guess is what I'm saying. So that's one of the betterments that we're discussing with it. They do require us to maintain any landscaping in that case along there, usually in an IGA, which would be coming back to you. Oops. I need to go back. So this is the fence on there, and on the fence, the fence you see in the picture currently is under the bridge. It's got a wall with a fence on top. And what they're proposing, if you look at the top picture, right in the center of that picture, you'll see a white line coming down. That's the Niver Creek Trail. And so what we're speaking with them about is extending that fence and barrier back to about where the Niver Creek Trail ends. And then they still need to put some guardrail or something along coming off Thornton Parkway. So we're talking about at the Thornton Parkway ramp, which is to the right there, that it comes off and they just use their standard guardrail there. But by putting that fence in there, and that takes you to the drainage, essentially about where the drainage area goes under interstate anyway. So that's what they're talking about at that location. All right. So I guess one of the questions we'd like to ask as staff is, first, we'd like to affirm that council wants us to pursue betterments. So that's a question we have.
Is there any objection to pursuing the betterments? I think we want to have all of our overpasses, their entryways into the city. We want them all the same.
Mhm.
Oh, we don't have a rusted green one with their head.
That's what we have now.
It'll be painted probably a green or a brown, but it would be that. So the second one is just realizing that budgets can be tight. We really wanted some prioritization from council. You know, do you want us to concentrate on the bridge or landscaping? What order would you like us to really concentrate on? And it'll give staff some guidance as we talk. Got the bridge lighting, the improved barrier fence along I-25 and improved landscaping.
I think the order you have is actually pretty good. Does anyone see any of those moving?
Thank you. So we'll move on to another I-25 project. This one's planned to open in July or August. It's our interim interchange. Hopefully it won't be there too long with the funding that just got approved on the 21st. You're looking north at I-25, the ramps going on and off, northbound off and southbound on ramp. The little white areas you see is the bus loading for Bustang. Bustang has, in talking with Paul DeRocher, the Director of Division of Transit and Rail, he plans to start the Bustang stopping there soon after they complete the project, construction on the project. So probably August or September. That parking lot that you see to the right is the park and ride through Lark Ridge. Eventually, with the ultimate interchange, there'll be 3 additional park and rides that will all meet with a center loading bus lane. That's as designed right now at 30%. That parking lot was built to where it does not have to be relocated. We were very careful with that on the interim design, and it can be extended to the south to hold an additional 100+ cars. So at that parking lot. Bustang runs from Union Station to Fort Collins and back. And so hopefully some of our residents can use that in both directions. 128th and Riverdale Road, the interim solution, there'll be an IGA before you on July 14th that adds a southbound right turn and eastbound left turn with Adams County. 136th Avenue widening at Big Dry Creek. This is a picture looking west of what it will look like when it's finished. There'll be a separate pedestrian and bicycle bridge on the outside of the existing bridge, and there'll be a little widening on that existing bridge to add that 3rd lane continuous from I-25 to Washington. Construction should start in 2026 here. And finally, the North Star Neighborhood federal funding, sidewalks and ramps, we received $1 million federal grant for that. This brings all the sidewalks and the ramps up to ADA standards for accessibility and completes the neighborhood. It is widening one sidewalk on each side of the street, shown in red above, in the red above. So with that, open to any additional questions.
Any questions? Chris?
The value engineering and as they continue to do design while development, do you see that or any potential for posing like the problems that Janet had kind of mentioned, like, well, we've already started construction, so we're gonna deviate from doing the right thing. And how does that play out? You know, because I do agree that that can be problematic, and are they gonna, you know, like, and what brought the question to mind was their proposal for 88. All right, we're now talking about narrowing it to one lane each, so like.
For 88th Avenue, they'll actually not start construction until they finish.
I'm just using that as the
Yeah.
example though,
Yeah.
like we
But
had a nice 4-lane road and now it's like, oh, we could save 10 million by bringing it down to 2 million. Is that do we foresee that happening with any of the other development by doing the value engineering? Like, we're already seeing some changes. How far does that go? I know it's not the same, because you said 88 is a different project, but nonetheless,
So my experience with CDOT up north, being on North I-25 coalition, I've seen what they do, and they work a lot with the locals on how those designs look. I know that they're looking at the ultimate interchange to see if there's a way to value engineer it, because it has on both Highway 7 and I-25, it has center loading bus stops in the middle of I-25 in the middle of Highway 7. So I know they're looking at it, but it's one of those things that we'll just need to have a lot of say in as they move forward. So.
okay, and then second question would be on 88th going from the 4 lanes down to 2 lanes. What do our traffic studies show? I mean, is that going to be detrimental to us?
No, it is not. Our 88th Avenue corridor study that we did, we actually looked at it in from Grant to Pecos. It reduces it to a lane in each direction with left turn lanes at the intersections, and puts in protected bike lanes along the entire stretch in there. When we did the traffic study, the traffic isn't that heavy there, and we can handle it.
Any other questions? Oh, John, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Ken, for the presentation, and thank you for your support, you know, for our NADA meetings as well. This might be a redundant question, but it's kind of on my mind when I saw value engineering. That does relate to whom we contract to do the work, correct?
Correct. This is the value engineering on this project is being done by CDOT staff and others that aren't related to the project.
Okay.
Now, when they get into a CMGC contract, sometimes that value engineering involves another consultant.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing happened in transportation, so thanks. I'm kidding. Thank you for all the work that you do for us.
Thank
Appreciate it. All right. Historical preservation.
Well, the staff's coming to the table. This is a follow-up to a prior discussion on the historic preservation plan and the code. And we've had some recommended changes to chapter 19 and look for your direction on a couple of specific questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Aaron and Kyle.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna kind of take the presentation tonight, but we're both here to answer any questions. So Rob kind of introduced some of the topics that we're going to touch on tonight, so we'll just jump right in. Chapter 19 of the city code is the city's historic recognition code. You may recall in February, you asked for more clarification on what possible amendments to the code could look like. And kind of the objective of tonight's presentation is kind of twofold. First, we want to see if council agrees with our minor changes that we're proposing that don't really need too much additional direction in order to create those amendments. And then the second part is that there are a few areas that we're going to seek some specific direction from you on, and before we can propose amendments, we want to make sure we're all on the same page with what those could look like. We'll just briefly go over what the historic recognition code is. We'll touch on also some state and national best practices that's kind of helped frame our recommendations. And then we'll kind of just dive into the possible amendments that you could see at a future date to review. As you may recall, the Historic Recognition Code is the city's code that enables staff, city council, or community members to recognize historic properties throughout the city. Within there, it outlines the process by which TASHCO recommends to you all, city council, as to whether or not you should approve or deny a historic recognition application. And then you're the final review body for such designations. Then that is done by resolution with some recommendations for preservation contained in that resolution. Our current processes are purely focused on recognition, so there is no standards by which we review development of historic structures if they are designated by Chapter 19. Some of the reasons to amend Chapter 19 are on the screen. We'll just kind of touch on these at a high level. First and foremost is that the city's historic preservation plan approved in December of 24 has several recommendations that outline trying to achieve what's called certified local government status. And many of those recommendations are kind of what frame this discussion to begin with. Additionally, changes to Chapter 19 can help align with some of the city's strategic plan goals, most notably within the vibrant and purposeful development and connected community focus areas. Additionally, amending Chapter 19 can improve the processes for the community, especially if the property is designated. Again, current code only focuses on recognition, has no standards for review of development, and so then therefore no protections. But again, I just want to note that any standards that could be changed can remain voluntary, and you can still achieve certified local government status with voluntary standards in that regard. Additionally, by amending the code, we could better align with certified local government requirements. It's not something we have to do, and nor do we recommend pursuing immediately, but it is something that long-term, if council ever wanted to make that decision, it could open up more state support for historic preservation and some no-match grants that would enable more planning and surveying work of historic preservation in Thornton. And kind of framing the discussion around moving from maybe an educational program to a preservation program. Currently, our program is entirely focused on recognition and therefore mostly educational or informational. By making some changes to the code, we can kind of start to move that dial, which if we were to seek full CLG compliance, we would become more of a preservation program. But by moving that needle a little more in the middle, we better prepare ourselves for future discussions around that topic, kind of moving a little in the center as opposed to a full preservation program. So now we're just going to kind of at a high level go over the different options that we have, and kind of there's 3 different groups that we've broken those out into. And you'll see those here in the table. The first 3 there are staff's recommended minor changes that really don't change the overall structure of our current Chapter 19. And we have another slide to go a little further into each of those. The 2 in the middle you see there are areas we do not recommend amendment at this time. And then lastly, those bottom 2 are areas that we just want to make sure before we leave tonight that we get kind of specific direction from you on which direction you'd like us to take those amendments. So on the screen here now are the minor amendments that staff recommends changing. The first is our noticing requirements. Current code only requires a 10-day mailed notice to property owners. And then for the council meeting, we use the typical council noticing procedures that are built into the city code. Our recommendation here would be to increase the noticing timelines to be more aligned with our neighbors, somewhere closer to maybe 15 to 25 days. And then the possibility of noticing by sign on properties proposed for designation. Our criteria for nomination is effectively on the screen there. It's pretty short and brief. It just requires that a structure be 50 years old and have some sort of importance in those categories you see on the screen, such as architectural or social importance. It's pretty typical of a historic preservation program to define that a little further with sub-criteria. So our recommendation would be to expand that with more specific and objective criteria rather than just what's on the center column there, because our code doesn't really get to that level of detail. Additionally, our current code doesn't really distinguish between districts and landmarks, so it doesn't really get into how you distinguish between the two. Is very vague mentions of districts. And we want to just make sure we fully specify owner consent with districts if, say, one was to be proposed. And the process by which city council could review design guidelines if we were to ever get a district proposed for Thornton.
Before you move on, any
Yep.
concerns with this one?
Questions, Bill's gonna wait to the end.
We can wait for questions. Okay.
I have a fancy table at the end for
Okay.
discussion.
I like fancy tables.
The areas that we're not considering for amendment at this time doesn't mean it's off the table in the future, but for this round, we're recommending not to touch the structure of our Historic Preservation Commission, and in Thornton, that's Tashco. So we're recommending that they maintain their position as a recommending body. And at the February meeting where we discussed these amendments originally, there was discussion around adding some land use restrictions with regards to designated structures, and we are also not recommending changes to that. The reason we're not recommending changes to the commission structure is we have pretty limited utilization at this stage, and it would increase administration and cost, which at this time we don't feel is necessary. You can still make all these minor changes we're proposing without changing the Tashco structure, which is another reason why we're not recommending the change. As far as land use restrictions, we don't recommend adding land use restrictions because it's not very typical of historic preservation programs. Like thinking about the East Lake grain elevator, it's not really a grain elevator anymore, so we wouldn't want to lock things into its use in a point in time. And it would also discourage utilization of the code to add land use restrictions. The next few slides kind of go into the areas that we're going to want to get a little more direction out of you before we end here. The first is around signage. Current code doesn't really allow for any signage. You have to kind of use some exceptions built into the land use code. It also doesn't have any prohibition, so it's not very clear if a property is designated on how we approach the signage. And there's kind of two paths we can take. We can just amend the code to just touch on signage and allow it and have standards. Or we could have a more proactive code that kind of spells out the process by which a plaque or a sign is made for designated structures. Both are very typical of historic preservation programs. It would just kind of be whether we want to do just signage tweaks or signage and a plaque program would kind of be the point of discussion there. A plaque program, however, would be a change in our program. It would cost money to administer, but we could put that cost on the application fee for historic designation, which is also pretty typical of neighboring cities. And here's just some examples of the signs we're talking about. On the left, kind of the typical landmark signs that you see on National Register listings. And there's an example of a district signage in Denver. That's kind of usually when you go in and out of the neighborhood, you have those just to kind of signify you're in a place of historic significance. And then on the right, you see there is a signage, several signs that we have at a park at York Street and 3rd and East Lake that kind of talks about the history of East Lake. That's also something that could be kind of brought forward in a plaque or signage program. The other area that we're kind of seeking a little more specific direction from council on is around the overall processes for the historic recognition code. Again, it's largely focused on recognition at this stage. And in order to better distinguish on how we review development of historic structures, whether that be an addition or an alteration or demolition of a historic structure, only if it is designated. We don't have any processes for that. There was also discussion at the February meeting around some administrative review processes. It is typical for some minor development to be reviewed by staff. However, there was discussion about whether or not we should consider administrative processes for the designation process. That is not typical of historic preservation programs. If we were to have CLG status on the table, we could not have removed the public hearing from designation process. We would need to maintain that. As far as reviewing development of historic structures, again, these standards can remain voluntary. You can build in exceptions to the code, say for economic hardship or life and safety hazards, things of that nature. And those are all things we could recommend in an amendment to the Chapter 19 as far as process goes. So just kind of wrapping up, staff's recommendation is to have council direct us to amend the code with all the minor changes, which would include amendments to our noticing requirements, expanding the criteria for nomination, signage amendments that then also brings forward proposals for a plaque program, clarification on districts versus landmarks, and amendments to our approval process to be a little more clear if we were to have a proposal that was on a designated property. The fancy table. So again, those are kind of the groupings. The top three, we feel like we have a lot of clarity on and could move forward with those minor changes. The two in the middle, we don't recommend change. And so in the first case, I guess we wanted to make sure that you agree with kind of the first five, that we don't amend the two in the center, and then the top three that we could make proposals for and bring back for you.
You want to ask your questions now, Devin?
Sure. So when I lived in Denver, we lived in a house that was a carriage house, was built in like 1909. One of the things that became a nightmare was trying to get renovations and things done. So would property owners still retain the full authority to renovate, redevelop, sell, demolish any of the properties that had been designated to that point? Then a follow-up with that is that if they wanted to renovate, for instance, I had to change out the windows in our house because they were built in 1909. It was a very long, drawn-out process of getting permits and things in place. Are we looking to add any of those kind of same criteria in place, or is this going to be, hey, this is a completely voluntary, if you want to have your house designated this or your building, great. If you don't, we don't care.
Yeah, so a couple of those. So I'll start with the windows. We could explicitly write in that that's not something we review. So that could be something we just exempt from the review process. Without kind of taking that change, we can't really we can't do that. If we were to just use the Secretary of the Interior standards, then it would be to that level, but we don't have to do that. And that wouldn't be our recommendation because it's not really something that we want to put on property owners. And as far as renovations and all that go, if you opt out of being designated, even if you're in the district, you're not a designated property, so you would not need to follow those standards. It would kind of be a voluntary, that you voluntarily choose to hold yourself to the higher bar. That said, we're not really going to try to get into the windows and paint color and all those little minor things. We could actually even explicitly prohibit standards that require that type of thing.
Okay, because Denver's pretty strict about all of their stuff, so I wouldn't want us to go down that same route because it made it a nightmare to get any kind of work done to the house.
Yeah, definitely hear that.
I mean, it feels to me like this overall plan is a feel good for the community members to be able to designate a landmark of something that's important to the community, not necessarily put additional restrictions or prohibit them from making changes or adjustments. It's more just as it's Tashko, it's arts, right? It's acknowledging our history without killing our ability to make things better.
Yeah, and it goes back into kind of my first question too, is if I were to buy a house that was designated as historic, but 15 years down the road, I'm like, I don't care about this house, it needs to be torn down. Is that gonna be prevented? Because in Denver, you can't do that. Once it's designated, you're not tearing the house down without going through like an act of God, essentially.
Yeah. We don't intend to recommend going to that level, and we could even build in 100% owner consent to even get a district on the table. So it would, in the case of like Eastlake or original Thornton, you would need hundreds to thousands of people to all say, yes, we want that.
Yeah.
And we could have the code set up to require that much consent before a district could be considered.
Great. Thank you.
So I think with that, is everybody okay with the minor changes? And are we okay with not making those changes on the not recommended? All right, and what about signage and plaques? Do we want the city to run? Do we want a shared cost?
I think if the city runs it, we get conformity, and I also like just want the flag, we'll build it into the cost of your fee, so.
So it's shared, like there's a fee associated with it, but it's covered by the city.
But we control
manages
the
it.
design of the plaque and how these things look, so I'd be fine with that.
Everybody okay with that?
Just leave that a plaque though, right? Just like-
It might depend on where it would be put. Maybe that's more information to figure out where a sign might work versus a plaque.
Yeah, and most of the city's programs that we've looked at are focused on plaques, and we don't have enough here that would elevate to that level, and that would really, most of the city-owned properties that are historic would be the ones that would kind of be getting the plaque. We don't really have anybody asking for large districts, and those typically don't get the plaques, so.
So that seems reasonable. Any objection? All right, and then on the approval process, I mean, to Devin's point, making sure that that we're not overly regulating. They don't get registry in the National Register of Historic Monuments unless they want to go down the separate route without us.
Need to bring back to us what you pencil out for the requirements.
Yeah, we would certainly have an opportunity to kind of like choose and see what we're proposing. If that's what you mean, like at another meeting to have.
Right,
red
yeah,
line.
Yes.
I mean, right now it's just very vague, so that's why.
You want a red line?
Maybe not, if it's great.
Well, but a red line, I think we'd have to look at the red line anyway to approve in
Right,
a
yeah.
code change, so.
So right now, I don't have a problem with it, but it also doesn't have any
Exactly.
specifics, so.
Yeah, we would come back before we're taking it to any sort of hearing. It wouldn't be done in a silo and it just sprung upon you.
All right, you need anything else from us?
I feel like you hit the questions, but I don't.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anything from council? You guys are awfully quiet tonight.
I'll wait till next week planning session to update the council on the airport coordinating committee.
I had just a question, there's that, and maybe you can just catch me up, Rob. The 27J meeting, that was May 13th, I thought they were just saying that they were gonna consider another date.
That's what I had heard, that they're gonna find another date.
Do we have an update on that? Sooner we get in the calendar with summer, it's.
Yeah, because we talked to the one board member at the 27J internship, and I don't think they have a date yet.
I don't have an update, but we will get one.
Reach out to Councilmember Carver Hall as well, because she serves both on Brighton City Council and
Yeah,
twenty-seven
she's
J
the one
School.
that Chris and I talked to.
I did, okay, excellent, all right.
You know, we were gonna follow up, so I just.
Yeah.
We connected or not,
Yeah, they said summer can get pretty busy, as we know,
yeah.
so. All right, if there's nothing else, we will take a break and I'll see you at 7 in chambers.